The innkeeper's hand trembled as he gripped the door handle. His weathered face composed into what he hoped was an expression of sleepy annoyance rather than terror. Behind him, in the cramped space beneath the cellar stairs, Shara pressed her body against the cold stone wall and tried to make herself smaller, an impossible task for an orc woman who stood nearly 6.5 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown sheep. She had arrived 3 hours earlier, soaked to the bone from the rain, clutching a leather satchel against her chest like it contained her very soul. Perhaps it did. The innkeeper, Aldric Xander, had taken one look at her green skin, her small tusks protruding from her lower lip, her pointed ears flattened against her skull in exhaustion and fear, and something in his chest had twisted. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who had survived battles they should not have, in the faces of children who had watched their villages burn. It was the look of someone who had lost everything and was running on nothing but the stubborn refusal to lie down and die. "Open up in the name of the King's Guard." The shout came again, accompanied by another round of pounding that rattled the hinges. Aldric took a breath, counted to 3 to make his delay seem natural, and pulled open the door with enough force to suggest irritation. "Do you have any idea what hour it is? I have paying guests trying to sleep." 3 soldiers stood on his doorstep, their uniforms marked with the insignia of the border regiment. The one in front, a lieutenant with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, held a torch that cast dancing shadows across his face. "We are searching for an orc, female. She passed through the village of Millbrook 2 days ago and has been tracked to this region. Have you seen her?" "An orc, here?" Aldric let incredulity color his voice even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "Why in the name of all the gods would an orc come to my establishment? That is not what I asked you." The lieutenant's voice was hard. "I asked if you have seen her." "No," Aldric said flatly. "No one here but paying guests, and I can assure you, none of them are orcs. My customers tend to be merchants, farmers, the occasional traveler, not monsters." The word tasted like ash in his mouth even as he said it, but he knew what these men wanted to hear. They wanted confirmation of their prejudices, reassurance that the world still made sense, that humans and orcs occupied separate spheres and any crossing of those lines was aberration. The lieutenant studied him for a long moment. "We need to search the premises." "Do you have authorization from the magistrate?" "We do not need authorization to hunt dangerous creatures. This is a private establishment. If you want to search it, you bring me proper papers, or you come back with the magistrate himself." Aldric kept his voice level, reasonable, the tone of a man standing on his rights rather than hiding anything. "I run a respectable business here, and I will not have my guests disturbed in the middle of the night because you are chasing rumors." Behind the lieutenant, one of the other soldiers shifted his weight. "Sir, there are 3 other inns in the area we have not checked yet. If she is not here, she was seen heading west," the lieutenant interrupted, but his conviction seemed to waver slightly. "If you are lying, innkeeper, it will go badly for you." "I am not lying. No one here but paying guests." Aldric met the man's eyes steadily. "Now, unless you plan to compensate me for lost business when word spreads that the King's Guard is harassing my patrons, I suggest you continue your search elsewhere." The standoff lasted another heartbeat, then 2. Finally, the lieutenant stepped back. "We will be watching this place. If she shows up, you report it immediately or you will be charged with harboring a fugitive." "Of course," Aldric said smoothly. "Good hunting, gentlemen." He closed the door with careful restraint, resisting the urge to slam it, and listened to the sound of boots on gravel as the soldiers moved away. Only when he was certain they had gone did he allow himself to sag against the doorframe, his legs suddenly weak. "They are gone," he called softly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard the quiet scrape of the hidden door beneath the cellar stairs opening, and Shara emerged into the common room like a shadow taking form. In the dim light of the single candle he had left burning, her green skin seemed to glow faintly, and her amber eyes were wide with something that might have been gratitude or might have been shock. "You lied for me," she said, her voice rough and low. Orc voices always carried a gravelly quality, but hers held an additional rasp that spoke of days without water, of screaming or crying or both. Why? It was a good question. Aldric was not sure he had a good answer. He was 43 years old, a veteran of the border wars who had retired to the quieter life of innkeeping when his knee took a spear thrust that left him with a permanent limp. He had fought orcs in his younger days, had watched friends die at their hands, had absorbed all the same lessons about their savagery and inhumanity that every soldier learned. But he had also, in the waning days of the war, seen things that complicated that simple narrative. He had seen orc mothers sheltering human children during a village raid gone wrong. He had seen orc warriors showing mercy when they had no tactical reason to do so. He had learned, slowly and painfully, that the world was more complex than the songs and stories suggested. And there was something about the way this particular orc had looked at him when she stumbled through his door, the way her voice had cracked when she asked, "Please, I can pay. I just need one night," that had reached past all his training and touched something human and fundamental. "Because you asked," he said finally. "Because you offered to pay. Because turning away a paying customer is bad business." It was a deflection, and they both knew it, but Shara accepted it with a small nod. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Aldric realized she was operating on the very edge of her reserves. "You need to get some sleep," he said. "The room I gave you is at the back of the second floor, quietest in the house. No one will bother you there. What if they come back? Then we deal with it when it happens. But right now, you look like you are about to fall over, and that will not help anyone." Shara hesitated, her hand still clutching the satchel. Up close, Aldric could see the details he had missed in her initial arrival. She was young, probably no more than 20 by human reckoning, though orcs aged differently and he could not be certain. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical braid that had mostly come undone, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. Her clothing was travel-worn but of good quality, leather and wool made for hard use. She was not some wild raider from the mountains. She was educated, civilized, and running from something that terrified her. "Thank you," she said at last. "I do not know how to repay this kindness." "You already paid. 2 silver for the room, remember." Aldric tried for a lightness he did not feel. "Now go rest. We can talk in the morning if you are still here." The if hung between them, an acknowledgement that she might slip away before dawn, and he would not blame her if she did. But Shara nodded and moved toward the stairs with the careful precision of someone who was concentrating very hard on each step. Aldric watched her go, then barred the front door and returned to his own small room behind the kitchen. He did not sleep. He lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling and wondered what in all the hells he had just gotten himself into. Morning came with the pale gray light that characterized early spring in this part of the kingdom. Aldric rose, dressed, and began the familiar routine of laying fires and preparing breakfast for his guests. He had 3 other rooms occupied at the moment. 2 traveling merchants who would likely depart before noon, and an elderly couple making their way to visit their daughter in the next province. All humans, all respectable, all precisely the sort of clientele he preferred, because they caused no trouble and paid on time. The merchants came down first, ate quickly, and were on their way with minimal conversation. The elderly couple took their time, commenting on the quality of the porridge and the freshness of the bread. Aldric chatted with them pleasantly while his mind worried at the problem upstairs like a dog with a bone. It was nearly midday before Shara appeared. She moved quietly for someone so large, and Aldric only noticed her because he was watching for her. She had changed clothing, now wearing a clean shirt and trousers that fit her muscular frame better, and she had rebraided her hair. The rest seemed to have helped, though she still carried herself with the wary tension of a hunted animal. "There is food in the kitchen," Aldric said without preamble. "You should eat." Shara glanced at the elderly couple, who had looked up at her entrance with expressions of shock rapidly transforming into fear. "I do not think that would be wise." "Nonsense. You are a paying guest, same as anyone." Aldric turned to the couple with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Is there a problem?" The old man opened his mouth, closed it, glanced at his wife. They were not brave people, not warriors or rebels. They were ordinary folk who had absorbed the same prejudices as everyone else but who also knew when to keep their opinions to themselves. The wife shook her head minutely. "No problem," the old man said at last. "No problem at all." "Excellent." Aldric gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on, then. I made extra, and it will just go to waste otherwise." Shara followed him into the kitchen, and once the door swung shut behind them, her shoulders relaxed fractionally. "You are going to bring trouble on yourself helping me, probably." Aldric ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table along with a thick slice of bread. "Sit. Eat. Then you can tell me what kind of trouble we are dealing with." For a moment he thought she might refuse, might grab her things and bolt for the door. But hunger won out over caution, and she sat, pulling the bowl toward herself with hands that were steady despite everything. She ate with the focused intensity of someone who had gone too long without proper meals, and Aldric busied himself with cleaning dishes to give her privacy. When she finally pushed the empty bowl away, she looked more solid somehow, more present. "They think I killed someone," she said without preamble. "A human merchant named Gareth Finley. They found him dead in his home 3 weeks ago, and I was the last person seen with him. Did you kill him?" "No." The answer was immediate and unequivocal. "He was my friend. He was teaching me to read and write in common, helping me understand human customs. Someone murdered him and made it look like an orc attack, and now the king's guard thinks I did it." "Why would someone do that?" "Because Gareth was helping me petition for land rights. There is a law, old and barely used, that allows non-humans to own property in the kingdom if they can prove they are civilized and peaceful. Gareth believed I had a case. He was helping me prepare the documentation, gathering witnesses who could testify to my character." Shara's hands clenched into fists on the table. Someone did not want that petition to succeed. Someone wanted to make sure that no orc could ever use that law, so they killed Gareth and framed me for it. It was an ugly story, and Aldric believed it entirely because it fit too well with what he knew of human nature and politics. There would be plenty of people who would see an orc gaining legal rights as the thin end of a very dangerous wedge, who would do whatever it took to prevent that precedent from being set. "What do you plan to do?" "I do not know." The admission seemed to cost her. "Run, I suppose." "Keep running until I am far enough away that no one recognizes me. Maybe cross the border into the free cities. Start over." "That is not much of a plan. It is all I have." Shara met his eyes, and there was a defiance in her gaze that he recognized. It was the same look he had seen in his own reflection after the injury that ended his military career, when he was trying to convince himself that what remained was still a life worth living. Unless you have a better suggestion, Aldric considered. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to send her on her way with some provisions and forget this had ever happened. But he had not done the smart thing when he hid her from the soldiers, and apparently he was not inclined to start now. Stay, he heard himself say. At least for a few days. Let the immediate heat die down. The soldiers will move their search elsewhere if nothing turns up here, and you will have time to rest and plan properly. That is insane. I will be putting you in danger. You will be putting me in more danger if you collapse on the road half a mile from here and get caught, and they trace your path back to my inn, Aldric countered. At least if you stay, we can control the situation somewhat. Why are you doing this? The question burst out of her like it had been building pressure all morning. I am an orc. You are human. We are supposed to be enemies. You should have turned me in the moment I walked through your door. Maybe I am tired of doing what I am supposed to do. Aldric shrugged. Maybe I think the laws are wrong. Maybe I just do not like seeing someone hunted for a crime they did not commit. Does it matter? It matters to me. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw past the green skin and tusks to the person underneath. He saw intelligence and determination, and a bone-deep exhaustion that was more than physical. He saw someone who had been fighting their entire life just to be seen as something other than a monster, and he felt a kinship that surprised him. Then let us say I am doing it because it is the right thing to do, and I have not done enough right things in my life to pass up an opportunity. He turned back to the dishes. You can stay in your room during the day when I have other guests. In the evenings, you can come down and help in the kitchen if you want. Give you something to do besides stare at the walls. You trust me in your kitchen. I trust you not to poison my food supply since you have to eat it too. He glanced over his shoulder and found himself almost smiling. Unless you are a terrible cook, in which case I may need to reconsider. Something flickered in Shara's expression, not quite a smile but close enough. I can cook. My mother made sure all her children knew how to feed themselves properly. Good. Then it is settled. It was not settled, of course. It was reckless and dangerous and likely to end badly for both of them. But sometimes the right choice and the smart choice were not the same thing, and Aldric had spent too much of his life being smart. Maybe it was time to try right instead. The next 3 days fell into an uneasy rhythm. Shara kept to her room during daylight hours, and Aldric went about his business as normally as he could manage. The soldiers did not return, though he heard from travelers that the search had widened to the surrounding villages. The description they circulated matched Shara perfectly, which meant she could not risk being seen. In the evenings, after the other guests had retired or departed, Shara would come down to the kitchen. At first, she merely sat at the table while Aldric worked, but gradually she began to help. She was competent with a knife, able to break down a chicken or chop vegetables with efficient precision. She knew how to manage a fire, how to season properly, how to judge when bread dough had risen enough. They did not talk much at first. Aldric was not sure what to say, and Shara seemed content with silence. But on the third evening, as they worked together to prepare a large batch of stew for the next day, she began to speak. I grew up in the northern clans, she said, her voice low. My father was a chieftain, my mother a healer. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. We lived the old ways, hunting and raiding, taking what we needed from human settlements. Aldric's hand stilled on the onion he was chopping, but he did not interrupt. I was good at it. Raiding, fighting. I was strong and fast, and I learned quickly. My father was proud. She paused, stirring the pot with more force than necessary. But I hated it. Hated the violence, the constant conflict. I would see human children crying over their dead parents, and I would think, what if that were my mother, my father? It did not make sense to me that their grief should matter less just because they were human. That must have been difficult. It was not acceptable. Orcs do not question the old ways. Orcs do not show weakness or sympathy for the enemy. Her voice carried a bitterness that spoke of old arguments, old pain. When I was 18, I left. Just walked away from the clan one night and did not look back. My mother tried to stop me. She said I would not survive alone, that I did not understand how the human world worked. She was right about the second part, but you survived anyway. Barely. I spent 2 years living in the forests, avoiding both orcs and humans. I taught myself to read by stealing books from abandoned homesteads. I learned common by listening outside village taverns. She smiled without humor. Eventually, I worked up the courage to approach a human settlement. Figured the worst they could do was kill me, and at least that would be an end to it. That is dark. I was not in a good place. She shrugged, a massive rolling of her shoulders, but I got lucky. There was a merchant, Gareth Finley, who was different. He saw me sneaking around his stall, trying to figure out the coins so I could buy food instead of stealing it. He could have called the guards, but instead he offered to teach me. Said he believed everyone deserved a chance to better themselves, regardless of what they were born as. Her voice cracked on the last words, and Aldric saw her grip tighten on the wooden spoon. He wanted to offer comfort but did not know how, so he simply moved closer, a silent presence that acknowledged her pain. He was a good man, Shara continued after a moment. One of the few who looked at me and saw a person instead of a monster. And now he is dead because he tried to help me, and I cannot even mourn him properly because I am too busy running. You can mourn him here, Aldric said quietly. You are safe here, at least for now. You can grieve. Shara turned to look at him, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. Why do you care? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Maybe that is exactly why I can care. No history between us, no debts or obligations. Just one person helping another because it is the decent thing to do. She studied him for a long moment, and Aldric had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated, weighed against some internal measure he did not understand. Finally, she nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture. Thank you, Aldric Xander. I will not forget this. You do not need to thank me. You are paying for your room, remember? It became a small joke between them, a way to deflect the weight of what was happening. But as the days turned into a week, Aldric found himself looking forward to the evening hours when Shara would come downstairs. She was good company once she relaxed enough to talk. She had a dry sense of humor and a perspective on the world that was entirely foreign to him. She told stories about the northern clans, about orcish traditions and beliefs, and Aldric found himself fascinated by the glimpses into a culture he had only ever encountered as an enemy. In return, he told her about his own past. About growing up as the son of a blacksmith, about joining the army as a young man seeking adventure, about the slow disillusionment that came from years of war. He told her about the injury that ended his career, about the bitterness he had felt at being cast aside, about the slow process of building a new life from the ashes of the old one. You regret it? Shara asked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, the work done and a pot of tea between them. Leaving the army, I did not exactly have a choice. That is not what I asked. Aldric considered the question seriously. No, I do not regret it. I regretted how it happened, the loss of choice. But the life I had was eating me alive, and I was too stubborn to see it. The injury forced me to change, and that change saved me in a way. He sipped his tea. Does that make sense? More than you know. Shara wrapped her large hands around her mug, dwarfing it. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are the things that set us free. They sat in comfortable silence, and Aldric realized with some surprise that he was content. It was a strange feeling, given the circumstances, but there was something about these quiet evening conversations that filled a hollow space he had not known existed. On the 10th day, everything changed. Aldric was in the common room, serving lunch to a pair of farmers who had stopped in for a meal, when the door opened, and a man walked in who made his blood run cold. Captain Marcus Thorne, former commanding officer, current magistrate of the surrounding district, and one of the most uncompromising bastards Aldric had ever had the misfortune to serve under. "Aldric," Thorne said, his voice carrying the same clipped authority it always had. "It has been a while." "Captain, or should I say magistrate," Aldric kept his voice level, professional. "What brings you to my establishment? I heard there has been some excitement in the area. King's Guard searching for a fugitive orc. I wanted to check in on the search personally." Thorne's eyes scanned the room with the systematic precision of a man used to noticing details. "I trust you have not had any trouble." "None at all. Quiet as always." "Good, good." Thorne moved to the bar, settling onto a stool with the air of a man who intended to stay a while. "Pour me an ale, would you? And we can catch up properly." Aldric's mind raced as he drew the ale. Shara was upstairs. She would hear voices and know to stay quiet, but if Thorne decided to investigate the rooms, there would be no explanation that would satisfy him. He needed to get the man out of the inn as quickly as possible. "I heard you took a position with the civil administration," Aldric said, handing over the mug. "Must be quite different from military life." "Different, yes. Easier in some ways, more complicated in others." Thorne drank deeply. "The army is simple. You have an enemy, you fight them. As magistrate, the enemies are not always so clear." "I imagine not. Take this situation with the orc, for instance. Clear-cut case on the surface. Orc kills human, orc runs, we hunt her down, but there are details that do not quite fit." Thorne's gaze fixed on Aldric with uncomfortable intensity. "The victim was a merchant named Gareth Finley. Did you know him?" "I have heard the name, never met him personally." "He was an odd man, very progressive in his thinking. Had some strange ideas about orcish rights, about integration between species. Made him unpopular in certain circles." Aldric forced himself to shrug. "Every village has its eccentrics." "True enough." But this particular eccentric was found dead in his home, his throat torn out in a manner consistent with orcish fighting style. And yet there are aspects of the scene that bother me. The wounds were too precise, too calculated. Orcs kill in rage or hunger. This was deliberate, methodical. Almost like someone was trying very hard to make it look like an orc attack. The admission hung in the air between them. Aldric carefully set down the glass he had been drying. "Are you saying you think the orc might be innocent?" "I am saying I have questions that need answering before I authorize a death warrant." Thorne finished his ale. "Which is why I need to find her before the King's Guard does. They have orders to kill on sight. I need her alive if we are going to get to the truth." It was a risk. A massive, potentially fatal risk. But Aldric had spent enough time with Shara to know that running would only delay the inevitable. If Thorne was genuinely questioning the official story, it might be her only chance at vindication. "Wait here," Aldric said quietly. Thorne's eyes sharpened. "Aldric, just wait." He climbed the stairs slowly, his heart pounding. At Shara's door he knocked once, twice. She opened it immediately, already dressed and clearly having heard enough of the conversation to be preparing for flight. "There is a magistrate downstairs," Aldric said without preamble. "Former army captain named Marcus Thorne. He has questions about the case, thinks something does not add up. He wants to find you before the King's Guard does." "And you believe him?" "I do not know." But I know that running is not working. You cannot hide forever, Shara. Eventually, someone will recognize you, and you will end up dead or imprisoned. This might be your only chance to clear your name. Fear and hope warred in her expression. If you are wrong, if I am wrong, we are both dead. But if I am right, this ends. You get your life back. You get justice for Gareth. He held out his hand. Trust me, please. Shara looked at his hand for a long moment, then placed her own in it. Her palm was rough with calluses, her grip strong enough to break bones if she wanted. But her touch was gentle, almost hesitant. I trust you, Aldric Xander. They descended the stairs together. Thorn stood when he saw Shara, his hand moving instinctively toward the sword at his belt, but he did not draw it. The two farmers had fled at some point, which was probably for the best. You are harboring a fugitive, Thorn said, but his voice held more curiosity than anger. I am sheltering an innocent person who was falsely accused, Aldric replied. There is a difference. That is for the law to decide. Then let the law decide. Shara stepped forward, her head held high despite the fear Aldric knew she must be feeling. I am Shara of the Northern clans. I did not kill Gareth Finley. He was my friend and teacher, and I would have died before harming him. Someone murdered him to prevent him from helping me establish legal rights, and then they framed me to ensure no other orc would dare try the same. Thorn listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slowly. That aligns with my own suspicions. The question is, can you prove any of it? I have the documentation Gareth was preparing. Testimonials from human witnesses, copies of the relevant laws, a formal petition written in his hand and signed by me. He kept everything at his home, but I managed to retrieve it before I fled. Shara indicated the satchel she had brought downstairs. It is all here. May I see it? Shara hesitated, glancing at Aldric. He nodded once and she handed over the satchel. Thorn spread the contents on the bar, examining each document with meticulous care. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of paper and the crackle of the fire. Finally, Thorn looked up. This is thorough work. Gareth Finley was clearly serious about this petition. And if he was killed to prevent it from being filed, that suggests someone with significant influence and a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Can you help her? Aldric asked. I can investigate, but I will need to take her into custody while I do so. For her own protection as much as anything. The King's Guard is still actively searching, and if they find her before I resolve this, there will be nothing I can do. No, Shara's voice was flat. I have spent the last 3 weeks running. I will not trade freedom for a cell, even if you promise it is temporary. The alternative is that you keep running until someone catches you and kills you. Is that really preferable? What if you leave her here? Aldric heard himself say. Both Thorn and Shara turned to stare at him. What if she remains in my custody, under house arrest or whatever the legal term is? I will vouch for her, guarantee she does not flee. You can investigate freely without worrying about the King's Guard, and she does not have to sit in a cell. That is highly irregular. Since when have you cared about irregular? Aldric met his former commander's eyes steadily. You always said a good officer uses the tools available to achieve the mission. Well, here are your tools. Use them. A long moment passed. Then Thorn's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. You always were a stubborn son of a bitch, Xander. Fine. She stays here under your recognizance, but if she runs, it is your head alongside hers. Understood? Understood. I will need to post a guard, at least during daylight hours, to maintain appearances if nothing else. As long as the guard stays outside and does not disturb my other guests. Agreed. Thorn began gathering the documents back into the satchel. I am keeping these for now. I will need them for the investigation. Give me 2 weeks. If I cannot turn up evidence that exonerates her by then, I will have no choice but to proceed with the existing charges. 2 weeks. It was not much time, but it was more than they had before. Shara nodded jerkily. Thank you, Magistrate. Do not thank me yet. I am not doing this out of kindness. I am doing it because I do not like being lied to, and someone is lying about how Gareth Finley died. I want the truth. He turned to Aldric. Take care of her, and for God's sake, be smart about this. You are walking a very thin line. When have I ever done anything else? Thorn snorted. Fair point. He headed for the door, pausing on the threshold. It is good to see you, Aldric, even under these circumstances. You too, Captain. When he was gone, Shara sank into a chair as if her legs would no longer hold her. That was insane. That was the most insane thing I have ever been part of. Welcome to my life. Aldric found he was shaking slightly, adrenaline flooding his system now that the immediate danger had passed. Are you all right? I do not know. Ask me in 2 weeks if we are both still alive. That is fair. They sat in silence for a time, processing what had just happened. Then Shara laughed, a short bark of sound that held more hysteria than humor. I cannot believe you convinced him to let me stay here. What were you thinking? I was thinking that I have become rather attached to my evening conversations, and I would be annoyed if they were cut short by you being dragged off to a cell. Aldric managed a crooked smile. Also, I might have been thinking that you deserve better than to be treated like a criminal when you have done nothing wrong. Shara's expression softened. You are a strange man, Aldric Xander. I have been told that before. The guard Thorn assigned was a young soldier named Private Elias Keene, barely 20 and clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. He took up a position outside the inn each morning and remained there until dusk, studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed. Aldric brought him food and water throughout the day, and the boy accepted it with mumbled thanks. He is terrified, Shara observed on the second day, watching from the upstairs window as Elias shifted his weight from foot to foot. He thinks I am going to murder everyone in their sleep. Give him time. Fear fades when nothing happens to justify it. It was optimistic, perhaps overly so, but Aldric found he needed to believe it. The alternative was too depressing to contemplate. Life settled into a new rhythm. With Thorn's official sanction, Shara was able to move more freely within the inn, though she still avoided being seen by guests during peak hours. She took over much of the cooking, freeing Aldric to focus on the business side of things, and he found that the quality of food improved noticeably. She had a knack for seasoning, and an instinctive understanding of how to make simple ingredients into something memorable. My mother's influence, she explained when he complimented a particularly good venison stew. She always said that food was healing, that a good meal could mend hurts that medicine could not touch. She made sure all her children understood that cooking was not just about filling bellies. It was about caring for people. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is. Shara corrected herself. I do not know if she is still alive. It has been 5 years since I left. Anything could have happened. Do you miss them, your family? Every day, but I cannot go back. I made my choice when I left, and there is no undoing it. Even if they would take me back, I am not the same person I was. I could not live that life again. She stirred the pot with slow, thoughtful movements. Do you ever think about the family you could have had, if you had made different choices? It was the kind of question that should have felt intrusive, but coming from Shara, it simply felt honest. Sometimes. I was engaged once when I was young and stupid. She was a blacksmith's daughter from my home village, pretty, practical, patient with my foolishness. But then I joined the army and she married someone else while I was gone. I cannot blame her. I was away for years at a time, and she wanted a stable life. Do you regret losing her? I regret losing the possibility of her, but I am not sure we would have been happy, even if I had stayed. I wanted things I could not articulate back then, things that would have taken me away from her eventually anyway. He paused. I think we sometimes mourn futures that would have made us miserable just because they were futures we lost. Shara nodded slowly. That is true. I used to imagine what my life would have been like if I had been born human. If I could have grown up without the constant violence, without the prejudice. But then I think about all the things I would have missed, all the ways that being orc has shaped me into who I am. And I realize I do not actually want to be someone else. I just want to be myself in a world that does not hate me for it. That is not too much to ask. It should not be, but it is. The first week passed slowly. Thorn sent word every few days, brief messages reporting on his progress. He had questioned witnesses, examined the crime scene again, begun building a timeline of Gareth Finley's last days. It was methodical work, the kind that required patience and attention to detail, and Aldric found himself respecting the magistrate's thoroughness even as he chafed at the lack of concrete results. Shara grew restless as the days went on. She was not built for inactivity, for waiting while others determined her fate. She took to pacing the common room in the late evenings, her long strides eating up the space, her tension palpable. We could spar, Aldric suggested one night, watching her wear a path in his floor. Work off some of that energy. She stopped, turning to look at him with surprise. You want to spar with me? Why not? I may have a bum knee, but I remember enough to give you a decent workout, and it has been years since I had a proper training partner. He stood, moving to clear space by pushing tables and chairs against the walls. Unless you are afraid of hurting me. It was a calculated provocation, and it worked. Shara's tusks showed in something that was almost a smile. You are going to regret this. Probably. They faced each other in the cleared space, and Aldric was struck by the sheer physicality of her. She was taller, stronger, built for combat in a way he had never been even in his prime. But he had experience and training, and he knew how to use an opponent's strength against them. They moved slowly at first, testing each other's reflexes. Shara pulled her punches, clearly worried about injuring him, and Aldric took advantage of her hesitation to land a few light strikes. She adapted quickly, and soon they were moving in earnest, trading blows and blocks in a rhythm that was almost like dancing. Aldric's knee ached, and he knew he would pay for this tomorrow, but it felt good to move like this again. To test himself against a skilled opponent, to feel the burn of muscles working hard. And there was something else, something he did not want to name, in the way Shara's eyes lit up with the challenge, in the flash of her grin when she scored a hit, in the unconscious grace of her movements. They sparred until they were both breathing hard, sweat dripping despite the cool evening air. Finally, Aldric called a halt, his knee screaming protest. You are good, Shara said, not even trying to hide her admiration. Really good. I thought I would overpower you easily, but you kept slipping around my attacks. You are stronger, but strength is not everything. Technique, timing, experience, those matter just as much. Aldric limped to a chair and lowered himself carefully. You have good instincts, though. Whoever trained you knew what they were doing. My father and my eldest brother. They were both war leaders, veterans of dozens of battles. They taught me that fighting was not just about winning. It was about surviving, about protecting those you care about. She sat cross-legged on the floor, completely at ease despite her size. They would hate what I have become, a pacifist who runs from conflict. You are not a pacifist. You know how to fight. You just choose not to unless you have to. That is called wisdom, not cowardice. Tell that to my clan. Your clan is not here, And honestly, based on what you have told me, they do not deserve you anyway." Shara looked at him for a long moment, her amber eyes soft in the firelight. "You are a good man, Aldric. I do not think you realize how rare that is. I am just a man. No better or worse than most. No, you are better. You see people for who they are, not what they are. That makes you rare." She stood in a single fluid motion. "I should let you rest. Your knee must be killing you." "It is not great," Aldric admitted, "but it was worth it." He watched her go, and as her footsteps faded up the stairs, he acknowledged the thing he had been trying to ignore for days. He was falling for her. It was insane, impossible, doomed from the start. She was an orc. He was human. Their worlds were not meant to collide, much less merge. But his heart apparently had not gotten that message, because every day he found himself looking forward to her presence more, found himself noticing the small details. The way she laughed, low and genuine. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The way her hands moved with such careful precision, despite their size. It was going to end badly. He knew that with the certainty of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize its patterns. Even if Thorn cleared her name, even if she gained legal rights to land and personhood, society would never accept them together. They would be pariahs, targets for violence and hatred. It was not fair, but it was reality. And yet, as he climbed the stairs to his own room, Aldric found he did not care about any of that as much as he should. Because for the first time in years, he felt alive. He felt like himself, like the person he had been before the army ground him down and the injury cast him aside. Shara had given that back to him, just by being herself, by trusting him, by seeing something in him worth trusting. Whatever happened next, he would not regret it. The end of the second week approached with agonizing slowness. Thorn sent word that he was close to a breakthrough, that he had identified a suspect, but he needed more time to gather evidence. Aldric relayed the message to Shara, who received it with visible frustration. "He is going to run out of time," she said, pacing again. 2 weeks was never going to be enough. He will get an extension if he needs it. Thorn is not the kind of man to let arbitrary deadlines stop him from pursuing the truth. You have a lot of faith in him. He was my commanding officer for 5 years. I know how he operates. If he says he is close, he is close. But even as Aldric said it, he felt doubt gnawing at him. What if Thorn could not find enough evidence? What if the real killer had covered their tracks too well? What if this whole thing was just delaying the inevitable? On the 13th day, everything came to a head. It started with a messenger arriving at dawn, a boy from the village who thrust a sealed letter at Aldric and then ran off without waiting for payment. Aldric broke the seal with shaking hands and read the contents twice to make sure he understood. Thorn had found the killer, a local landowner named Harlow Garrett, who had significant business interests that would have been threatened by orc land ownership. Garrett had hired thugs to murder Gareth Finley and stage it to look like an orc attack, but he had made mistakes. Small things, details that did not quite fit, and Thorn had pulled at those threads until the whole fabrication unraveled. Garrett was in custody. His hired killers had confessed. Shara was exonerated. Aldric read the letter a third time, then climbed the stairs to Shara's room and knocked. She opened the door immediately, clearly awake and dressed. "It is over," he said, handing her the letter. "You are free." He watched her read, watched the disbelief bloom into hope, and then into something like relief so profound it brought her to her knees. She made a sound, half sob and half laugh, and pressed the letter against her chest like she could absorb its truth through sheer will. Aldric knelt beside her, his knee protesting but ignored. "You are free, Shara. Gareth's killer has been caught. You can stop running." "I am free," she whispered. "I am actually free." They stayed like that for a long moment, the morning light streaming through the window, the letter crumpled between them. Then Shara looked up at him, her eyes wet but clear. "I can leave. I can go anywhere, do anything. I can finish Gareth's work, file the petition properly, establish the precedent we were trying to create." Her voice gained strength as she spoke. "I can make his death mean something." "You can," Aldric agreed, even as something in his chest clenched painfully at the thought of her leaving. "I could stay," she said quietly. "If you wanted, I could stay here, help you run the inn. I am a paying guest after all." It was said lightly, but there was a question underneath, a vulnerability that he had not heard from her before. Aldric realized with a start that she was asking for more than just a place to stay. She was asking if there could be something between them, something real and lasting. Every practical bone in his body screamed that it was impossible. But his heart, the stubborn, foolish thing, did not care about practical. "I would like that," he said simply. "I would like that very much." Shara smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Without the weight of fear and stress, she looked younger, lighter, like someone who had finally set down a burden they had carried too long. "Then I will stay, for as long as you will have me." "That might be a very long time." "Good." She leaned forward, and Aldric met her halfway. The kiss was hesitant at first, uncertain. Two people discovering how to fit together despite their differences. Her tusks were strange against his mouth, but not unpleasant, just different. Her lips were soft, her breath warm, and when she pulled back, they were both smiling. "I have never done that before," Shara admitted. "Kissed anyone, I mean." "How was it?" "Strange." "Good. I think I would like to do it again." "I think that can be arranged." They kissed again, longer this time, and Aldric felt something slot into place in his chest. This was right. It might be complicated and difficult and fraught with social obstacles, but it was right in a way that transcended all of that. The official clearing of Shara's name took another week of legal proceedings. Thorne pushed the paperwork through with the same ruthless efficiency he had brought to his investigation. And by the time it was done, Shara was not only exonerated but officially recognized as having legal standing to own property and conduct business in the kingdom. It was a precedent, exactly what Gareth Finlay had been working toward, and his death had ultimately made it possible in a way his life might not have. Shara took the news with mixed emotions. "He would have been so happy," she said, holding the official documents. He believed this was possible, believed that laws could change, that people could learn to see past their prejudices. And he was right, but he should be here to see it. "He is here," Aldric said gently. "In you, in what you are doing, in the future you are building. That is how people live on after death, through the changes they inspire." It was not enough, could never be enough, but it was something. News of Shara's exoneration and legal status spread through the region like wildfire. Reactions were mixed. Some people were angry, calling it a dangerous precedent that would lead to chaos. Others were cautiously optimistic, seeing it as a step toward a more just society. Most simply did not care one way or another, too busy with their own lives to worry about abstract legal principles. Aldric's Inn saw a change in clientele. Some of his regular guests stopped coming, uncomfortable with the idea of an orc on the premises. But others came specifically because they had heard about what Aldric had done, about the stand he had taken. Merchants who traded with both human and orc communities. Scholars interested in cross-species relations. Even a few orcs who were curious about this unprecedented development. Shara became a fixture at the inn, working alongside Aldric with an ease that suggested they had been partners for years rather than weeks. She was good with guests, her directness and lack of artifice putting people at ease once they got past their initial prejudices. Children especially loved her, fascinated by her size and strength, and the way she would lift them onto her shoulders to see the world from a new perspective. Aldric found himself happier than he had been in years. The work was hard, the hours long, but it felt meaningful in a way his previous life never had. He was building something, not just a business but a space where people could see past their differences and find common ground. Of course, not everyone was pleased with the arrangement. 3 months after Shara officially moved into the inn as Aldric's business partner and romantic companion, they had their first serious confrontation. It happened on a market day. Aldric and Shara had gone into the village to purchase supplies, moving through the stalls with comfortable familiarity. They were loading sacks of flour onto their cart when a group of men approached. Aldric recognized 2 of them as former soldiers he had served with, though he did not know them well. "Xander," the leader said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About your pet orc. About the fact that you are flaunting your unnatural relationship in front of decent people. About how you are making all of us look bad." Aldric felt Shara tense beside him. He laid a hand on her arm, a silent request for patience. "Shara is my business partner and my companion. What we are to each other is our business, not yours. It is everyone's business when you are normalizing this kind of perversion. You fought orcs in the war. You know what they are capable of. How can you betray your own kind like this?" "I am not betraying anyone. I am choosing to see people as individuals rather than judging them based on their race. That is called being decent. It is called being a traitor." The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Around them, other villagers had stopped to watch, drawn by the confrontation. Aldric saw fear and curiosity and judgment in their faces, and he knew that how he handled this moment would determine a lot about their future here. "If living my life on my own terms makes me a traitor, then I am a traitor," he said clearly. "But I fought for this kingdom for 20 years. I bled for it, I killed for it, and I was crippled for it. So do not talk to me about betrayal. I have earned the right to choose my own path. You have not earned the right to make the rest of us uncomfortable in our own village. Then look away." Shara's voice cut through the tension, low and level. "If our existence offends you, do not look at us. Do not speak to us. Pretend we do not exist. But do not stand there and tell us that your comfort is more important than our right to live as we choose." The men bristled, hands moving toward weapons, and Aldric felt the situation teetering on the edge of violence. But before anyone could act, a new voice entered the fray. "Is there a problem here?" Magistrate Thorn stepped through the crowd, his presence instantly commanding attention. "Because if there is, I would be very interested to hear about it, especially since I am always looking for people who might be willing to join my investigation into threats against lawful citizens." The implication was clear. Anyone who moved against Aldric and Shara would find themselves under legal scrutiny, and given Thorn's reputation for thoroughness, that was a threat no one wanted to face. The leader of the group backed down, though his expression remained hostile. "No problem, Magistrate. Just a friendly conversation. I am glad to hear it. Do make sure it stays friendly." Thorn watched them go, then turned to Aldric and Shara. "Are you all right?" "We are fine," Aldric said. "Thank you for the intervention. I did not do it for you. I did it because I do not tolerate vigilante justice in my district." But there was a hint of warmth in Thorn's eyes that belied the harsh words. "Though for what it is worth, I think you are handling this well. Change is never easy, and you are pioneering something that challenges a lot of deeply held beliefs. There will be pushback, but you are also showing people that their fears are unfounded, and that matters. I hope you are right." "I usually am," Thorn smiled briefly. "Take care of yourselves." And if anyone gives you serious trouble, you come to me immediately. Understood? Understood. The incident left them both shaken, but it also clarified things. They were not going to be accepted easily. There would be hostility, confrontations, maybe even violence. But they had allies too, people who believed in what they represented, and they had each other. That night, as they sat in the kitchen after closing, Shara voiced the thought that had been haunting both of them. We could go somewhere else. Find a place where we are not known, where our relationship would not be such a scandal. We could, Aldric agreed. But then someone else would face what we are facing, someone without our resources or allies. I would rather stay and prove that it is possible to live like this, to be happy like this, than run and leave the problem for others. Even if it is dangerous, even then. He reached across the table and took her hand. I am not going to pretend this is easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. And you, Shara, are worthwhile. We are worthwhile. I want to fight for that. She squeezed his hand, her grip strong and sure. Then we fight together. Together. The seasons turned. Summer faded into autumn and autumn into winter. The inn prospered despite the initial resistance, becoming known as a place where all were welcome regardless of race or background. Aldric and Shara's relationship deepened, moving from tentative beginnings to something solid and enduring. They learned each other's quirks and habits, learned how to argue and reconcile, learned how to build a life that was uniquely theirs. On the first anniversary of the day Shara had stumbled into his inn, Aldric asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the fire after a long day, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other too well to need constant conversation. Aldric had been planning something elaborate, some grand gesture, but in the moment, it felt wrong. This was not about grand gestures. It was about two people choosing each other every day, despite everything that said they should not. Marry me, he said, simple and direct. Shara turned to look at him, her amber eyes wide. What? Marry me, bond with me, whatever you want to call it. I want to commit to you formally, publicly, in a way that makes it clear we are together for the rest of our lives. Aldric, you know that is not legal. Human and orc marriages are not recognized under kingdom law. So we changed the law. You got property rights changed. We can change this too. And even if we cannot, even if no court ever acknowledges it, I do not care. I know what you mean to me. I want you to know it too in a way that leaves no doubt. Shara's eyes glistened. You are serious, completely. You realize this will make everything harder. The prejudice, the hostility. It will all intensify if we formalize our relationship. I know. And I do not care. Marry me, Shara. Say yes. For a long moment she just looked at him, and Aldric felt his heart hammering in his chest. Then she smiled, that full, brilliant smile that transformed her entire face, and nodded. Yes. Yes, I will marry you, Aldric Xander. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and felt joy bubbling up in his chest so intensely it was almost painful. They were going to do this. They were going to forge a future together despite everything, and it was going to be beautiful and difficult and utterly worth it. The wedding took place in the spring, a year and a half after Shara first walked through Aldric's door. It was a small affair, held in the clearing behind the inn, with only their closest friends and allies present. Magistrate Thorn officiated, using a combination of human and orcish traditions that Shara taught him. There was no legal weight to the ceremony, but that did not matter. What mattered was the vows they made to each other, the promises to stand together through whatever came. Shara wore a dress she had made herself, deep green to match her skin, with embroidery in silver thread that caught the light. Aldric wore his best clothes, and for once, his limp did not bother him because Shara was there, strong and solid at his side, and he knew that if he stumbled, she would catch him. They exchanged rings, simple bands of iron inscribed with words in both Common and Orcish. "Together always," Aldric's read. "Strength in unity," said Shara's. They kissed to seal the ceremony, and their friends cheered, and for that moment the world was exactly as it should be. The years that followed were not easy. There were more confrontations, more prejudice, more moments when Aldric questioned whether they could sustain what they had built. But there were also triumphs. Shara successfully filed her petition for land rights, establishing the precedent Gareth Finley had died for. Other orcs, inspired by her example, began seeking legal recognition and integration into human society. The process was slow and painful, but it was happening. Aldric and Shara expanded the inn, adding more rooms and a larger common area. They hired staff, including a young orc woman who had been cast out of her clan for refusing to participate in raids. The inn became a haven for those caught between worlds, for people who did not fit the narrow definitions society tried to impose. 5 years after their wedding, Shara came to Aldric with news that changed everything again. "I am pregnant," she said, her voice caught between fear and wonder. Aldric stared at her, processing the information. Human orc children were not unheard of, but they were rare, often the result of violence rather than love. No one was entirely sure what to expect, how such a child would develop, whether they would be healthy. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "The healer confirmed it this morning. She says I am about 2 months along." Shara's hand moved to her stomach in an unconscious protective gesture. "Aldric, I am terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if the child is not accepted by either humans or orcs? What kind of life are we bringing them into?" "The same kind of life we have," Aldric said, moving to take her hands. "Difficult, complicated, but full of love and possibility. We will figure it out just like we have figured out everything else. Together." "Together," Shara echoed, and some of the fear faded from her eyes. Their daughter was born in the dead of winter, arriving with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the world. She was small by orc standards, large by human ones, with skin that was a lighter shade of green than her mother's and small buds where tusks would eventually grow. She had Aldric's eyes, dark and curious, and Shara's pointed ears. She was perfect. They named her Alara after Aldric's mother, and she became the heart of their small family. As she grew, it became clear that she had inherited the best of both her parents. She was strong and quick like Shara, but also clever and thoughtful like Aldric. She moved between human and orc communities with an ease that neither of her parents could manage, seeing no contradiction in embracing both parts of her heritage. The inn thrived. Alara grew. The world, slowly and grudgingly, began to change. More orcs sought integration, more humans learned to look past their prejudices. It was not perfect. There were still conflicts, still violence, still deep wells of hatred that would take generations to drain. But progress was happening, one small step at a time, and Aldric and Shara were part of it. On the 10th anniversary of the night Shara first walked through his door, Aldric stood on the porch of the inn and looked out over the land they had built together. The inn was larger now, more prosperous, its reputation solid. Inside, he could hear Shara teaching Alara how to bake bread, their voices mingling in easy conversation. In the distance, the mountains rose against the sky, the same mountains that separated human and orc territories, but which seemed less insurmountable now than they once had. It had not been an easy decade. There had been pain and loss and more close calls than Aldric liked to remember. But there had also been joy and love, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful. He had found in Shara not just a partner, but a companion who understood him in ways he had never thought possible. She had given him a future he had not known to hope for, and in return, he had given her a home and acceptance and the freedom to be herself without apology. The door opened behind him, and Shara stepped out, wrapping her arms around him from behind. She was warm and solid, and Aldric leaned back into her embrace. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am." He turned in her arms so he could see her face. "Do you remember that first night when the soldiers came looking for you? How could I forget? I was certain I was going to die, that you would turn me in or that they would find me anyway. And then you lied for me. You said no one here but paying guests, and you made me believe I could survive. You did more than survive. You thrived. We both did. Because of you. Because you saw me as a person when no one else would. Because you took a chance on something impossible." She kissed him softly. "I love you, Aldric Xander. I will love you until my last breath. I love you too, Shara. Always." They stood together on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside, their daughter sang to herself, happy and safe and completely unaware of how remarkable her very existence was. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and they were part of that change. They had proven that love could cross boundaries that were supposed to be absolute, that different did not mean incompatible, that the future could be better than the past if people were willing to fight for it. It had started with a desperate woman seeking shelter and a cynical innkeeper deciding to take a chance. It had grown into something neither of them could have predicted, something beautiful and enduring. And as Aldric held his wife and listened to his daughter's voice and felt the peace that came from a life well lived, he knew with absolute certainty that he would not change a single moment of it. The inn stood solid on its foundation, a beacon for those who needed refuge, a symbol of what was possible when people chose compassion over fear. And in the years to come, it would serve as a reminder that sometimes the greatest changes begin with the smallest acts of kindness, that sometimes all it takes to change the world is one person looking at another and saying, "You are welcome here." Soldiers had kicked down his door looking for an orc, and Aldric had looked them in the eye and lied without hesitation. "No one here but paying guests," he had said, and in that moment, he had chosen a path that would define the rest of his life. It had been the right choice then, and it remained the right choice now, validated by every day they spent together, by every obstacle they overcame, by every person who looked at their family and saw not an aberration but a possibility. The future stretched out before them, uncertain and challenging, but they would face it together. They would continue to build and grow and prove that love was stronger than prejudice, that understanding could triumph over hate. And when people asked how it had all started, when they wanted to know the story of the innkeeper and the orc who changed the laws of the kingdom, Aldric would smile and say, "She was a paying guest, and that made all the difference, because in the end, that was what it came down to. Not grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but the simple act of seeing another person's humanity and choosing to honor it. Shara had walked through his door seeking shelter, and Aldric had given it to her. And from that single choice, an entire life had blossomed. As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, Aldric and Shara went back inside, closing the door behind them on another day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Tomorrow, they would continue the work of building a better world, one conversation and one act of kindness at a time. But tonight, they would simply be together, a family gathered around the hearth, sharing a meal and stories and the comfortable warmth of home. Tonight, they would celebrate the life they had created against all odds, the love that had sustained them through everything, and the future that still waited, bright with promise. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains and a new day began, Aldric would open his inn to travelers and guests, both human and orc and everything in between. He would serve them food made with Shara's skill and his care. He would listen to their stories and offer them rest and send them on their way with full bellies and lighter hearts, because that was what an innkeeper did. That was what a good person did. And Aldric Xander, former soldier, current innkeeper, devoted husband and father, had spent enough time being cynical and bitter. He had found something better, something worth protecting and nurturing and celebrating. He had found love where it was not supposed to exist. He had found family where society said there should only be enemies. And he had found purpose in the simple act of keeping his door open to those who needed refuge, no matter who or what they were. It had been 10 years since that fateful night when everything changed. 10 years of struggle and growth and transformation. 10 years of proving that the impossible could become possible if people were willing to try. And as Aldric settled into bed beside Shara, feeling her warmth and strength and presence beside him, he whispered a quiet thank you to whatever gods or fate or random chance had brought her to his door. Because she had saved him just as surely as he had saved her, and together they had built something that mattered, something that would outlast them both and ripple forward into a future they could only imagine. "Good night," Shara murmured, already half asleep. "Good night," Aldric replied and closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. And that was enough. That was everything.